and that's good. I'm so glad that we're kind of moving along with some progress at least, and maybe the vaccine will make a difference in the coming months, and so we're excited about that. I have had some discussions with some people about the vaccine, and I know there's all kinds of opinions. And turn it down just a little bit on me. I'm a little loud for everybody. But when they're covering their ears, I don't know whether it's they don't like the message, but I hadn't got in the message yet, so it can't be that. So it must be a little bit. So, but anyway, I've talked to some people about it, and everybody has an opinion. It's kind of like noses and everything. And my mother-in-law, she's 80 years old. My father-in-law's 85 years old. And I talked to them about the vaccine and everything, and they were going to get it. Then I heard they weren't going to get it. So I called them the other day, and I said, before you make a decision, let me get you to do something for me. And I'll just share this with you, and you can decide whether or not you do it or not. That's your decision. But before you make that decision based on things you read on the internet, I just want you to do this. Pull out all the medications you have in your medicine cabinet. Put that medication in the internet and find out how many horror stories you're going to hear about that. Then I want you to think about the fact, that's what I told her. I said, now look, you'll go to your doctor. That doctor will prescribe you a medicine. You'll go get that prescription filled. You'll take that medicine and won't even look it up. You'll just take it. Why? Because you trust that doctor that he's going to take care of you. I mean, he's been taking care of you for years. And you trust him. And you know he's studied things out and he's doing these things. And now all of a sudden he's telling you. I said, did you ask your doctor what he was going to do? She said, yeah. He said he was going to take the vaccine. And he said, well, did he ask you if you were? He said, yes. She said, he asked me if I was going to take the vaccine. I told him at that time, yes, I was. And she said, so we didn't have any more conversation. I said, now, think about this. Your own doctor who you trust, who you will trust your life in his hands. If he told you you needed a surgery, you would go get that surgery because you trust him. He himself is going to go get it. And you're worried about some guy out here on the internet you don't even know anything about. I said, so be careful. I said, all I'm asking you to do is go and check it out. Look at your medicine cabinet because you will be surprised at the horror stories you're going to hear about the nasal spray you put up your nose or anything else that you've taken. A baby aspirin. Matter of fact, maybe you shouldn't. Because you will see that there's a lot of horror stories out there for anything out there. So find somebody you trust, not somebody you don't know. Find somebody you trust. That's all I'm saying. And if you can trust them with your life, then she said, well, I've been hearing all these things about long-term effects. I said, Pawpaw's 85 years old. How long-term are you talking about here? So I'm just saying, now if I was a 20-year-old, I might rethink it. I know if I was pregnant, I probably wouldn't. But that's because they haven't done any testing on pregnant women. But outside that, just do your research. But as you do your research, make sure you same due diligence when you're doing anything else. And everything has a risk. I'll just tell you that. Everything. By the way, coming to church this services, you took a lot of risk coming to services this morning. Probably a higher risk of you getting killed coming here than it would be taking that vaccine. Just saying. So let's try to get things moved on. And I'm not telling you, if you decide not to, that's your business. But if you decide not to, just be quiet about it. Don't fuss about COVID anymore. Just because, there's something out there and you're not doing it, so quit fussing about it. They gave you something to try to take care of it. You're not going to do it, so quit fussing about it. If you do take it, then we'll get on to life and move on. Because I'm ready to move on with this thing. I know there's several people who are still going around and all that. And this auditorium looks so much better this morning than it has in the last few weeks. And I'm so glad that you're here this morning. If you're tuning in live feed, I know we got 11 people tuned in right now on our live feed. Again, you make your own judgments on these things, but I'm just saying be consistent. Consistency is hard to do. Now we're continuing our series of lessons on faith that de-escalates conflict. That's what we did last week. It's a part of our series on faith that works when life doesn't. And we're certainly in some difficult days, and we're trying to make some decisions. And we're in this part, and I skipped a little bit to get over here because it's so relevant to what's going on in our world right now that I thought, you know what, I need to speak to you things that are going on. Last week I talked about social media again, and I talked about the idea that you need to be careful when you post. And we talked about how that in James chapter 3 in verse 18, he gives this verse. Those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of goodness. You might want to put a star beside that verse. Those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap the harvest of goodness. We know that Jesus in that great Sermon on the Mount told us in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers. And then he goes on to say, they will be called the children of God. So the proof that you're really a child of God, the proof that you're really born again, that you are on your way to heaven, that you are in the family of God, the proof that you are is that you are a peacemaker in this world. Are you? I mean, that's one of the proofs. I forgot to turn my audio on, the regular audio on my live feed. The proof that you are a child of God is what? Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Not a troublemaker, not a conflict maker, but a peacemaker. Now, before we look at this, again, I talked about the idea that there's two things that being a peacemaker is not. Number one, peacemaker is not avoiding. You know, we have people who just avoid conflict at any cost. And you know, I have a daughter who is one of those kind of people. She just does not like controversy, and she will avoid it at any cost. That's not really healthy. Actually, that's kind of cowardice when you think about it. And I know the thing, because it takes bravery to stand up for what is right. But it's not avoiding at all cost. And peacemaking is not appeasing. Well, I'm just going to give in to what everybody wants, no matter what. That's not it either. Appeasement is not peacemaking. In fact, that's called codependency. You're going to always give in all the time. That's not what he's talking about when he's talking about being a peacemaker. Now, he knew how to diffuse a conflict. He knew how to deal with it face on. He knew how to resolve it, and he knew how to restore a relationship. Jesus knew those things. Now, again, he didn't run away from conflict. There was times when there were conflict, and he dealt with those conflicts. But Jesus was, if anybody ever was a peacemaker. So let's look at some of the things. We talked about last week two things. The first thing we said was, if you want to be a peacemaker, first thing you need to learn how to do is lower your voice. Lower your voice, because the louder you get, the louder the other person gets in the argument. Isn't that true? And when you start yelling and you start shouting and everything, you're both going to do the same thing. And the reason why the first thing you need to do in any conflict is to lower your voice. There's a couple of reasons. We talked about that last week. Your brain operates on two levels. The fight and flight level, which is the base level of your heart, your mind, and then the frontal cortex of your mind that does the thinking and speech and all those kinds of things. When you give into the baser side, you don't think right. And so I said last week, he said a gentle response will calm a person's anger, but harsh words stir up intense fury. That's what he tells us. So you need to understand in Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 17, the quiet words of a wise person are more effective than the shouting of a leader of fools. You need to understand that. Then we said, secondly, breathe and slow down the pace of your speaking. A lot of times we just, we get excited, we start talking a little faster and all that. And let me tell you this, one of the things we need to know is you get back what you give out. And so, if you get all excited, they're going to get all excited. So you need to kind of slow down and get yourself under control. Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 11 says, a fool gives full vent to his anger, but by biding his time, the wise man calms it down. Great verse. The fool gives full vent to his anger, but by biding his time, the wise man calms it down. So you want to lower your voice, you want to slow your speech when you start to get upset. Proverbs 15 and verse 18. People with hot tempers start fights and cause trouble, but a calm, cool spirit keeps the peace. Another verse says similar in Ecclesiastes chapter 10 and verse 4, where it says, if a ruler, or anyone else for that matter, loses his temper against you, don't panic. A calm disposition quiets intemperate rage. A calm disposition quiets intemperate rage. If somebody comes to you with full force of anger, don't panic and don't, I talked about last year, those mirror neurons we have in our head where, we react the way somebody else reacts. Don't let that happen to you. But slow down, lower your voice, take a breath, slow your speech. And that's what wise people do. Now the third thing, and that's where we are this week. The third thing is listen more than you talk. Listen more than talk. Now, we keep coming back to that verse in James chapter 1 and verse 19 because it's so applicable. James chapter 1 and verse 19 says this. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Now, if you do the first two, the third one's going to just fall right in line. If you're quick to listen and you're slow to speak, you're going to be slow to get angry. On the other hand, if you do the other, it's going to be the exact opposite. When you're quick to speak, when you're slow to listen, the result is you're fast to get angry. Notice the Bible says we need to listen. Just slow down and listen. Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 10. And I tell you, this is King James Version. It says, only by pride causes contention. Only by pride cometh contention. And then the Message translation says, arrogant know-it-alls stir up discord. The wise men and women listen to each other's counsel. Arrogant know-it-alls stir up discord. Okay. When you think you already know what the other person is going to say or somebody else is going to do, you think you understand them and you don't, you're just going to stir up discord. That's pride. That's arrogance. The rest of that verse says, arrogant know-it-alls stir up discord. In other words, they create conflict. Pride is the source of all conflict, but he says, wise men and women listen to each other, each other's counsel. Oh my goodness. Wise men and women listen to each other's counsel. Why is it so hard to hear advice from people who are the closest to you? Have you ever noticed that? I don't know. But the Bible tells us we need to put our pride aside and we need to just listen, and we need to listen for something very specific. And that's number 4. In this step number 4 of diffusing conflict, listen to the hurt behind the words. If you get this, you're going to really make progress in your relationship. Stop listening to the words and start listening to the emotions behind the words. What they're saying is not merely as important as the emotion that they're trying to communicate. Are they afraid? They may be saying, I'm afraid. They may be afraid. They may be depressed. They may be jealous. They may be anxious. Look for the hurt behind the words. So many times we argue with somebody in an argument over words when that's not really the real issue. I always talk about things sometimes when somebody comes to you about something. Sometimes I tell them, the issues are not really the issue. In other words, what they're telling you is just a smoke cloud for something even deeper. That what they're telling you is not really the real problem. The real problem is something deeper than that. But so you got to listen behind the words. The real issue is the emotion behind the words. You need to look for the hurt. Hear the hurt behind the words. Sometimes, I give you permission just to ignore the words. And instead, focus on the mood. What are they emoting? What are they saying in this? When they do that, if you'll do that, you'll be less defensive. If you come to me in anger, I tend to get defensive. That's what I do. But if all of a sudden I realize that what you have is not anger, it's frustration, I'm a little bit more liable to give you some slack. Or if you're fearful, I'm a little bit more likely to cut you some slack because I understand fear and frustration better than I understand anger. Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 10 says this. Great verse. Each heart knows its own bitterness. Each heart knows its own bitterness. Now, what is that verse saying? God is saying everyone has a hidden hurt. Everyone has a hidden pain. Everyone has a hidden wound. Do you know? There's a famous story about an old story about two men, and guy asked one of them, said, "Are you my friend?" He said, "Well, yeah, I'm your friend." "Are you my friend for life?" "Well, yes, I'm your friend for life." "Then tell me, where do I hurt?" Because if you're really my friend, you're going to know where I hurt. And if you know where I hurt, if you don't know where I hurt, you're just a casual friend. Each heart knows its own bitterness. You need to stop paying so much attention to the words that people say and listen to their mood, listen to their emotions, listen to the pain behind their statement. All right? And then you come to number 5. Number 5, and how to diffuse a conflict, pray while you're listening. Yeah. While you're pausing and while you're being quiet and while you're listening and while you're listening for the hurt, you pray while you're listening. I ran across a verse in Judges chapter 6 and verse 24. He says this. He says, Gideon built an altar for worshiping the Lord, and he called it, "The Lord Calms Our Fears." What a great name for an altar. The Lord calms our fears. Now, when you're in a conflict with a parent, with a child, with a spouse, with a protest with an officer, with a teacher, with a boss, with a store clerk, anytime you get in a conflict, you need to stop and pray. And while you're praying, say, Lord, the Lord calms me. The Lord calms my fears. And when the Lord calms your fears, then you're going to be able to do those things like lower your voice and take a pause and slow your pace and start listening. When you get the Lord helping you in this, when you pray, what are you praying for? You're saying, Lord, calm me down. Lord, just calm me down. He is the God who calms our fears. In Psalm 65 verse 7, he says this, God stills the raging oceans, quiets the noise of roaring waves, and calms the uproar of the people. Wow. Look at that phrase. He calms the uproar of the people. That's an interesting phrase. I looked it up. The Living Bible translated as, He quiets all the world's clamor. Don't you need that done in your life sometimes? I mean, to have the world's clamor just quieted in your life. Of course, it'd help if you turn the TV off, the news off. The New Living Translation is, He calms the shouting of the nations. The shouting of the nations, the noise pollution of all the modern world. The Message paraphrase translated it this, He calms the mobs in noisy riot. Wow. That's the kind of verse we need today in all the things we're seeing and facing. He calms the mobs in a noisy riot. Calms my fears, calms my anxiety, calms my worries, calms my frustrations, calms me down. He is the King of kings and Lord of lords, and who can calm the seas. And if He can calm a stormy sea, He can calm the storm in your heart. Now, number 6. The 6th step of lowering conflict, of diffusing those situations is, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. Seek to understand before seeking to be understood. Try to figure out what they're thinking and they're saying before you start trying to convince them about what you're trying to say. Don't worry about them understanding you until you fully understand them. That's the loving way. That's the Christ-like way. That's the Christian way. Proverbs 18 and verse 13 says this, a person who answers without listening is foolish and disgraceful. A person who answers without listening first is foolish and disgraceful. So often we're so busy trying to get people to see our way of thinking that we don't take the time to listen to them. We don't even stop to listen. Listen. Make sure you understand them first. You might even say, you go first. And then when you share with them, you're sharing, you say, now let me understand it. This is what I heard you say. Is this right? And you can say back to them what you think they said, and if it isn't right, let them correct it. I mean, Jan, isn't that what you do in your counseling sessions? This is what I heard you say. Am I understanding that right? And there's oftentimes they will tell you, no, that's not what I meant. Of course, I hear that from my wife all the time. No, that's not what I meant. You should understand what I meant. And it gets frustrating because I said, well, all I'm doing is, this is what you said. Of course, I mess up doing that. I know what you said. Well, that's not what I meant. Well, this is what you said, but that's not what I meant. And it just makes the conflict much more. So we need to be careful. We need to listen. A person who answers without listening is foolish and disgraceful. And you could say back to them those things. You say, well, if you didn't say it right, then let's correct it. And right along with that is number 7. Number 7 is try to see their perspective. Listen to them. Seek to understand them before seeking to be understood. I'm going to tell you what, that's the problem in our world right now. You've got the CNN crowd and you got the Fox News crowd, and neither shall the twain meet. I mean, isn't that right? I mean, you've got the ones that are on the conservative, and you know what? It's amazing, and I think that's the reason that there's so many misunderstandings. You could turn to 2 different news channels and hear the same story, and you'll get done when you say, now, wait a minute. How can that be the same? Well, it's all in their what? Perspective. You see what I'm saying? Maybe we would be a little more compassionate to those that we disagree with if we learn to see from maybe just a little bit from their perspective. Even if you don't agree with their perspective, you still need to try to see it from their perspective. Listen to them. Seek to understand them before seeking to be understood. Again, Philippians chapter 2, 4 and 5. Each of you should look not to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Jesus Christ. Each of you should look not on your own interest, but also to the interest of others. You should look not only to your own interest, again, but to the interest of others. Try to understand their perspective. Now, that doesn't mean you compromise what you believe, but at least you can understand where they're coming from. You can understand why they are messed up like they are. Yeah. You can understand at least where they're coming from. Right now, we've got people on different sides of different arguments, and all they can see is their side. And this is what's happening all over America and all over the world. All they can see is their side. They can't see the fear of the other people. They can't see the hurt of the other people. They can't see the injustice of the other people. They can't see the criticisms of the other people. Basically, what I'm seeing in the world is we got 2 groups of people that are diametrically opposed, both feeling like they're being marginalized. And so they're getting louder and getting louder and getting louder because they feel like nobody's hearing them. And that's both extremes. All they can see is their side. I don't need your help. By the way, I'll throw this out, won't cost you anything extra too. One of the arguments that my my sister-in-law made about not getting the thing was that they're liable to put a chip in you. I said, you worried about a chip and you carry one of these things around and it's listening to you all the time and it knows where you are. It knows everything you buy. Yeah, and I said, and you're worried about him putting a chip in you? If you leave that thing at home, you'll go home and get it. Go get the shot. But we do. But, we hear all these things and we get all stirred up and we get our interest. We close our mind and we only see one side of a situation. And it tears us up. They can't see the pain of others. All they can see is what's in themselves. He said, don't just look at your own interests, but be interested in the interests of others. And then he goes on like, your attitude should be the same as what? That of Jesus Christ. Now, I'll tell you, friend, that's not easy. It's certainly not natural. I mean, I am by nature not interested in anybody else. By nature. I am by nature more interested in me than I am interested in anybody else. Only Jesus can change my wants. Only Jesus can change my perspective. Only Jesus can make me interested in what you've been through and interested in your background as I am in my own in protecting my kind of people and my background and my religion and all those other things, my family. Only God can change you in that perspective. And that's why the 8th step, number 8, is to ask God. to give me a clear picture of myself. Ask God to give you a clear picture of yourself. That's one of the scariest things to do. God, I want you to give me a clear perspective, a clear photograph, a clear portrait of me. That's hard. One of the verses that I remember for a lot of years is Psalm chapter 139, 23 and 24. And it goes like this. It says, search me, O God, and examine my heart. Test me and know my nervous thoughts. Point out anything in me that is wrong. Then lead me onto the paths that are always right. You know, when you get in a conflict, you get nervous. Know my nervous thoughts. Point out in me, not somebody else. Not in my wife, not in my kids, not in my staff, not my friends, my neighbors. Point out in me anything in me that is wrong. And then lead me to the path that is always right. Well, that's a good verse to memorize, isn't it? It's a good verse to have you to pray to God when you're in the middle of a conflict, all right? I mean, if you genuinely pray, search me, O God, and examine my heart, test me, and know my nervous thoughts, point out anything in me that is wrong, then lead me to the path that is always right. You know what? God will show you. He's not going to play games with you, and He'll show you. And how many times has God said, Mitchell, here's the problem. You're the problem in this conflict. You're the problem. Or even if I'm just part of the problem, here's your part in that problem. And when you do that, you come to the next step, step number 9. I'm giving you 10 steps. Step number 9, admit to any part of the conflict that I caused. I'm responsible for my part. You're responsible for your part. Whether you own up to your part or not is none of my business. That's between you and God. But my business is to admit any part of the conflict that I caused because of my bias, because of my background, because of my prejudice, because of my insensitivity, or because of my immaturity, because of my business, and I don't pay attention, and 1,000 other reasons that I could have caused a conflict. I need to admit any part of that conflict that I might have. Jesus loves to use hyperbole or exaggeration to make his point. In the Sermon on the Mount, you remember in the Sermon on the Mount, there were those people, he's talking about admitting your part in a conflict that's been caused. And he says in Matthew chapter 7, verse 3 through 5, he says, why do you notice a little piece of dust in your friend's eye, but you don't notice the big piece of wood in your own eye? He says, first, take the wood out of your own eye, the big wood out of your own eye, then you'll see clearly to take the dust out of your friend's eye. And then he says, before you start working on that splinter in your spouse or in your neighbor or in somebody you work with, before you get the splinter out of there, you don't get the telephone pole. You need to get the telephone pole out of your own eye. It's jamming up everything that you can't see wisely. That's the ninth step. Then finally, number 10, choose my words carefully. Choose my words carefully. If you're going to de-escalate, words have the power to set on fire the forest. Isn't that what he tells us in James? He said it has a little spark can cause a great fire. You have the power of life and death. You can destroy life. We're going to actually come back to this. I don't have time to go into that because there's a major section in the book of James that talks about the power of tongue. We've talked about that twice. It's interesting that James talks about it so much in that book because it is so powerful. But when I say choose your words carefully, I'm thinking of Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18. He says, reckless words pierce like a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. The tongue of the wise brings healing. That's what you need to pray for. God, give me the tongue of the wise. I want my tongue to be a healing source, not a reckless words that tear people up. A lot of cold cuts. God, put a muzzle on my mouth. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago when we had the dogs here, in which my dog did a better job, just saying. But, it depends on who's holding the muzzle, who's holding the leash. We talk about putting a leash on your lips, but you need to make sure the right person's holding the leash. Now, I've gone through these 10 steps very quickly, but I want you to take them and think about it. In Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 29 says, don't use harmful words, but only helpful words. The kind that builds up and provides what is needful. The tongue of the wise brings healing. Now, again, I've gone through these things. If you meet with your small group this week, maybe that would be a good topic to talk about in your life group sometime. Take these 10 steps and say, how can I make these applications? Or just take them home and talk about them. I've given you more than enough information on how to be a peacemaker in 10 steps. Jesus said, now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them. You're not going to be blessed by hearing this message. You're going to be blessed if you actually do it. Take these 10 steps and use them in areas of your life, in conflict in your life. Why do you want to do this? Because what Jesus said, again, we talked about in Matthew. Whoop, I lost my power there. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9, he says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Are you a child of God? Are you a peacemaker? But maybe you've never met Jesus. And if not, it would be my privilege to introduce him to you. You can open up your life to him. If you will give Jesus the power, if you will apply these 10 things that we just talked about in your life, you'll have more peace and you'll have less conflict. Would you bow with me? Father, I want to thank you for your word. It's so practical. It's so relevant. It's so needed. And Lord, we need peacemakers. Of all times, we need them right now. We need them in our schools. We need them in our cities. We need them in our churches. We need them in our communities. We need peacemakers in our families. We need peacemakers at work, around the world. You've told us that from your word how to reduce conflict, how to diffuse it, and then even how to resolve and restore relationships. And I pray that this week you'll raise up a group of peacemakers, that you'll tell us who we need to go to make peace with, that we've been at odds with, that we're had a conflict with. And Lord, where there's so much conflict in the world, we pray that these truths will be shared and there could be peace where there was violence, where there was destruction, where there's conflict. I want to be the Prince of Peace. I want you to be the Prince of Peace in my life. Fill my life with your love. Take out hatred. Take out bitterness. Take out pain and hurt. Fill it with peace and purpose. And I want to get to know you, and I want to follow you and trust you. For this I pray in your dear Son's name. And amen. Listen, if we can help you this morning, he is a God of peace, and he will bring peace into your life, a peace that passes understanding. And if we can help you with that this morning, if you'll come while we stand, we offer the invitation.